Howdy tubers, welcome back to the Zach Life. So in this video, we're going to overhaul this pump. So I'm putting this video together a little bit differently. Obviously the introduction here is after the fact. I came out here right now, I just changed the oil in the pump again. We got through with it this morning. It's this evening. Checked it out, everything looks great, it's good to go. This is a model 3211 Gaso. This is the pump that injects the water from the, goes to the separator in the water tank and actually pumps it down the injection well. This video is going to be a assembly video only. It's not going to have the teardown in it. I'm going to try to get as much information to you, keep it kind of interesting and waste as little of your time as possible. So let's cut to several days ago and start putting this thing together. So I got this old nasty case wiped out about as good as I can get it. This sucks, there's just no two ways about it. We're out here in the dirt. This thing's gonna be full of dirt when we're done. It just is what it is. So the first thing we gotta do is put the crossheads and rods in it. Let's go back to the shop and show you how I assemble these. So I'm not sure in y'all's perspective exactly where this press is at as far as it being built. But this is actually directly between two videos. I got this part done, but the bed isn't finished, but I need to use this thing, so that's what I'm gonna do. I've got to press these bushings out and change the bushings. I've got new bushings. I don't have a lot of press tools set up. This is pretty wonky here, but I'm gonna do what I gotta do here. So the next thing we've got to do here is to size the pin bushing for the pin. It's probably about 25 to 30 thousandths too small right now, and the reason for that is you can't make them precision, because if the rod here was worn a little bit, it would throw off this or out around or whatever. So what we're going to use here is called an adjustable reamer. So it's got slots cut in it that these cutters go in, and the slots get deeper as it goes towards the end. And you can see these have got a taper cut in them, I guess is what you would call it. So as you move them this way, they sink down. As you go this way, they get more proud, and obviously they cut a bigger, the diameter gets bigger as you go this way. I took it apart just to show how it works. This is set up for a bigger pump, and I have to adjust it. And these are always a pain to get set up, because there's not a real good way of measuring them. Okay, this is not my favorite thing to do. I like to just sort of get this thing running. We'll run it real slow and I'll try to hold it. I got a piece of wood here in case this thing comes loose. I don't really know what that's going to help if it locks up. It's probably going to break something. I don't know. Let's crank this machine up. I'll squirt a little bit of oil in here and we'll make a pass. So this old machine's so loud, I'm going to voice this over. I made a slight adjustment here. The first pass was actually a lot closer than I expected. It was actually closer than I wanted. I made an adjustment here, make another pass. It's still just a little bit too tight. I can sort of start it in there. I make another very slight adjustment and run it back across there. And this last one here, you can't feel any slack, and there's a little bit of resistance in pulling the pin in and out, but it moves very easily, and we're going to call this good. This is probably about a 1/2 thousandth or something clearance. There's a hole, I don't know if you'll be able to see, there's a hole in here that's an oiling hole that lines up with this hole, and the crankshaft throws oil up in this trough of this rod and it runs down into the wrist pin bushing. Alright, here are the crossheads. These things are pretty rough. They are probably wore really bad, and I haven't measured them, and I'm not going to because they're what's going back in it regardless. Really simply, we've got a wrist pin that goes in the side. I think it can go in either way, and through the rod. This is a press fit into the crosshead. Let's put them together. I always like to take these and start this wrist pin in with a hammer because it's easy to break if you try to press it in and get it cockeyed. Of course, I've already done that. I drove it in there about 1/4 of an inch or something. Let's start pushing on it. And so I'm going to take this rod and slide it up on the wrist pin so that it's lined up, and then let's push on it a little bit. All right, I got some micro mist. I'm going to spray some oil in the bores here for the crossheads, and we will slide it in. Got to make sure the oil holes in the rod go towards the top. So I'm going to voice this over because the wind's so bad. The next thing, I got to put the main caps on it and the seal plate here. These are shimmed to the case to set the backlash in the crankshaft. And on the bull wheel side, on the side closest to us, I'll just put one thick shim. Use it basically like a gasket. And the majority of the shims will be on the far side. This has the crank running a little bit offset. It'll be, you know, to the right of the pump. But that allows you later on, if you need to take some shims out of that, you can do it without having to pull the bull wheel off the case. And I think there's plenty of room, you know, in the rod bearings and in the wrist pins to, you know, accompany this 1/16 of an inch or so offset. And then this is the plate that holds the seal, and we'll use the same thing. We'll use a thick shim like a gasket. So I'm going to put all these shims on here. I got 2 packs. I may need more than this on this side, and we'll check and see where it's at. You know, these water pumps actually require quite a bit of dirt in them. If you run clean oil in them, they won't work. You got to have them full of dirt so it keeps everything polished. Definitely not enough. So the crank has got no play in it, and I can't twist it, so we need more shims. But you can look in here and see the shims are crushed, so we probably don't need that much more. That actually might be it right there. So I'm looking for, it's going to be just a little bit too tight. I'm looking for 0 to maybe 3 or 4 thousandths in play. I'm not measuring it. I'm just, you know, doing it by feel. Or, you know, perhaps a very light preload. That is a light preload right there. There's no slack. But the problem is when I put these other 6 bolts in, it's going to collapse out a little bit more and it'll be too tight. So we'll pull this off and put one more real thin shim in it. Okay, so here comes the next nightmarish part about working on these stupid things. See that? Made in USA, that's what we like. So these are the rod bearings. Both halves are the same, and that's so as they wear you can put the front one in the back, because on a pump like this all the wear is always on the front. So we will slip a rod bearing in this thing. We've got to roll the crate around here and get the top rod bolt in here. It's kind of a trick. Will just barely fit. So these rod bearings are not a precision bearing. They're not like a bearing in an engine. And so what you have to do, or how these are set, is you have got a pack of shims here that is a shim between the rod and the rod cap, and this sets the oil clearance on the rods. Now these two shims are the shims that came out of this rod, but the crankshaft was worth 30 thousandths and the bearings were wore out, and I put used parts back in this last time so that I know that it needs more shims than it came out of it. One of the things that sucks so bad about this is you don't really know where to start. You just got to guess, and it's kind of a pain to take it together and apart and put it together and take it apart. Rod bolt's bent. So we want basically no movement that we can feel, but we don't want any drag on the bearing when we turn the wheel here. I don't feel any movement and no resistance, so that's probably exactly where we need to be. Now I got two more to do. So I've got all these shimmed just like I want them. They're all, you know, nothing's tight, but you can't feel any slack in anything. I want to disassemble all these. I'm going to take them all back apart one at a time, keeping the shims exactly where they go. And I'm going to take brake cleaner and I'm going to spray these out, and I'm going to get as much dirt, get them as clean as I possibly can, and then bolt them back together. And I'm going to spray the housing out. This is going to be the final cleaning. I got it all tore apart and reassembled and tight and as clean as it's going to get. I still see a dirt clod right there, or a rock or something. It just sucks out here. There's just nothing you can do about it. The dirt out here is just like powder, and it's just everywhere on everything. It's clay when you don't have any vegetation growing in it. So when I sprayed this off and put it back together, these two caps tightened up a little bit, probably because there was crap in the shims. I'm afraid they're too tight. What I'm going to do is put the belts on this thing. I've got some micro mist here that's sort of like 30 weight oil in a spray can, and I'm going to spray the bearings down, and I'm going to run this for a little while without any oil in it other than when I'm spraying on it, open like this, and I'll be able to fill these caps and see if anything's getting hot. All right, that's what we wanted to see. That thing's free completely up. So I'm gonna go over this again. I'm gonna spray everything out clean as I can, and then I'm going to take some silicone and bolt this outside thing on here, the cover, whatever you call it. Oh crap. How many of y'all saw that coming? I went home and got my little welder and a bigger nut. I'm gonna try to weld a nut onto that stupid tap. Well, this wasn't exactly the plan, but I'll take what I can get. All right, let's pack this crank in here. I got a tube of grease, a paintbrush, and a significant amount of dirt. Let's see if we can get some crap smeared in here. Here's what the packing looks like. It's a lip seal packing, pretty straightforward. So here's a little tool I built. It's basically a threaded punch with different size ends. And you can use it like a hammer. Then we've got this terribly corroded, nearly dead piece that goes next. We'll put a little bit of dope on this just for try to keep the corrosion down in on the bolts. I'm going to do these other two. So I got these done. We're done with the crank end here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put some oil in this thing, start it up and let it run for 15 or 20 minutes just to get it lubed, get all the dirt out of the bearings, you know, blah blah blah. Just get it cleaned up before we pack this in and actually hook it up to the, you know, have it pump water so that it'll sort of freewheel and just get cleaned up before we put a load on it. Also, I'm going to go start a well. The tank's empty right now. We'll get some water coming in, so we'll have here in an hour or two, we'll have plenty of water to start it and test it. And I'm going to go set and pick up and cool off because it's 108 degrees. I have misplaced a dipstick. It's laying here somewhere, but if you fill the oil up to the bottom of the crossheads, that's the full mark. Okay, fluid in time. So this is one of the reasons this pump's such a piece of junk. This is all rotted out and rusted. It just sucks. And I don't know how well you'll be able to see up in there. I'll just show you in a minute. The first thing I'm going to do is this fluid in here. If you look in here, this is what we're looking at. This right inside here is this. We've got to clean up the ID of that. so that the packing, this is the same kind of idea, it's just different size of what's in here, that this packing will do it the best we can to seal off. Also, if there's a bunch of buildup and crap in there, you'll sort of egg this packing or whatever, and that makes it rub tighter against the plungers, and if the plungers get hot, they'll break. What I've got is a little wire brush on a long drill extension here, and I'm going to go from the outside with my drill and clean this up with that brush. Get all the scale and all the growth and rust and crap and whatnot out of it. See if I can get you down in here where you can see. But in this stuffing box, there's ridges in it, or more specifically, there's grooves cut in it. And what that's from is these rings of this packing. If people don't get this tight, it'll wiggle back and forth, and it'll eat into that housing. And that keeps, after it wears into it, it keeps this from being able to seal to the housing of the stuffing box. And that causes these things to leak. That's the worst thing you can do, one of these pumps, is not get this gland. I'll show you when we get all together. It's not to get it tight. You basically ruin this fluid in. I don't know what these cost, but the next size up, this brass piece on the end, it's actually aluminum bronze, is $13,000.
I'm going to voice this over because of wind. The first piece here is a piece of brass that goes in the fluid end. It's just basically the stop that the packing goes up against. The next piece is a hard plastic piece. It's a spacer. And then you've got two pieces of the actual packing. So next you've got a thin plastic spacer. After that, you've got a brass ring that's known as the junk ring. The last piece of packing, and last there is another thin plastic spacer.
The last spacer and the gland. So I'm done for the day. I'm not going to have a heat stroke. It's 2 o'clock. I'm not done for the day, but I'm done working on this for the day. I've got to go check all the rest of the leases. But I'll come back in the morning and I'll get those other two stuffed, and we'll catch you back when I get that done and finish that thing up in the morning. Well, how y'all like our 0% chance of rain here? The left all my power tools out. Pump's full of water. So I got the rest of these packed. The next we're putting plungers in. I got 2 new plungers. I'm reusing one old one. The problem with the old one is, as this gets wore here, the part that seals the crank end, and that allows water to get into the crank end and the oil to get out. And so this one wasn't too bad, but the other two were really bad. So I got 2 new ones. These are about, I think these are about $600 a piece. They're really expensive. These are porcelain. Lost you. Okay, I got these done. Next thing is I got to drop the valves in it. These are wing guided valves. I don't know if you can see down in there. It's got a seat. Falls into. Doink. I realize y'all probably can't see down in there. So there's 2 different kinds of springs that go in these pumps. There's a light and a heavy. And there's a lot of people in this industry, even people that work on pumps, that argue the heavy springs break or the light springs won't shut the valves or something like that. And this is absolutely false. This is stupid. People don't know this. But the light springs have got to go in the bottom. then the upper valve, and then the heavy spring in the top. And the reason is if you put the same spring on top and bottom, it'll hold this discharge valve up off the seat just a little bit. And then when the plunger starts back, it slams the valve shut and it goes quack, quack, quack. And that breaks springs, and it's just hard on everything. It jars everything. It'll make the hose surge. And so these have got to have a heavy in the top, light in the bottom. The next thing is I got to put the valve caps on it. So I built me basically a big gallon wrench. It's on my 3/4 drive Milwaukee Impact. I just welded a nut onto a extension. Believe it or not, this usually won't get them tight enough, they'll leak, but we can bump them up after we crank the pump up. We've got 3 more to put on the front. We'll be done with this thing. Okay, so I got to put this on here, this cover. I just always put 1 bolt in these. They're supposed to have 6 bolts in the gasket, but that's not how I do it. And the reason is they want you to put oil in this thing in this 1-inch plug, and it's, you know, doesn't work. You got to carry a funnel and heck with that. And so I put 1 bolt in these, and you can just slide this out of the way and dump oil in it, and they do a much better job than you would dream of just sitting there. They really don't move. I guess let's crank it up.
So if you listen real close in this next clip, you can hear a sound that sort of sounds like a rod knock. Now the fluid in on these, the valves slamming shut, the valves make a lot of noise, but there is a sound in there that sounds sort of like a rod knock. I know that it isn't. It's probably a crosshead that's loose. A crosshead is moving up and down in the housing, sort of like piston slap in an engine. I'm not concerned about that, but there is just a little bit of noise there. If you listen, you can pick out it shouldn't be. I get it, mostly. So I guess we're done. I'm gonna let the water tank fill up. I know a lot of y'all are probably screaming, that thing's full of water, it rained in it. Well, you're right, it did. And I don't want to, I took the old drain plug out of it and drained what water I could get out of it. I don't want to pull the back off of it again. I think what I'm going to do is just let it run for a few hours and kind of churn it up. Hopefully if it makes a milkshake, it'll pick up any dirt that's in it as well, get it really nice and churned up. And I'll go over there and drain the oil out of it and flush it out real good, and then refill it up with oil here, you know, after lunch. It's now it's 10:54, 10:58, and it's 91 degrees, probably 100% humidity. It's already kind of getting rough. I'd like to talk a little bit more about this pump. This is getting into the segment that probably most people are not interested in, and you hate to put it in the middle of the video because you're afraid you lose people. But for those of you that want a little more technical information, so this pump out here, I've only been getting runs of about 2 years. It runs about 2 years. And it's not uncommon for these pumps to last 10 years or even much longer. In fact, I got one running I bought 10 years ago. It was just field ran then, and it still sounds great, you know, and it's still in excellent shape. The problem with this pump out here is that it's running so fast, and it's running fast because it's too small of a pump. This lease originally had a P323 Wheatley, which is a 3 1/8 stroke water pump, and that pump was wore out and needed completely gone through, and the stuffing boxes were worn like I explained on this one, and I ended up hauling it to the house, and I came up with this pump. It was down in a lease down in the river bottom that we sold, we got rid of, and
I think that it had been underwater about once a year for about 10 years. It'd been sitting there. Anyway, I took it home and made just enough pump out of it to be able to use here temporarily, and that's been probably 6 or 7 or 8 years ago. You know how that kind of stuff goes. And so the problem is, so those pumps are rated for 500 RPMs, and it's probably running 400 or something like that. And it's not the speed that kills them. You know, I think that it could run at 500 RPMs forever and not be a problem. But it's that all the parts are moving so fast and at the plungers and stuff, that when you have something that leaks, whether it's the fluid in packing, it's going to spray the water back at the water pump, or the crossheads moving in, the oil slings the oil to the front of the case there real hard, and it kind of pukes it over the front or out the seal, the crank end seals of the plunger, and it causes communication at those fluids. I made another lease here. We got a 3-inch stroke 3364. This is the same manufacturer, kind of the same idea as that other pump. Uses the same valves, but it's just one step bigger. It's 3-inch stroke instead of 2-inch, and you can actually run a little bit bigger plunger in it. Let's go take a quick look at it. So this pump here is a 3364. It's got 2 1/4 plungers in it and a 3-inch stroke instead of 2. And it just runs nice and slow here. It just ka-kunk, 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 ka-kunk. And you can see there's no oil being slung. It's not slinging the oil out of it. As something starts leaking here, it doesn't sling it back into the crank end. And this is why running the pump slow is better. Not necessarily just the speed of it, but it's what you don't have communication with these fluids. This place we're at here has actually got 2 of these pumps that sit side by side. It takes 2 pumps to move all the water that we need to move. This is our biggest lease. And the far pump is tore up. It needs an overhaul, basically just like we did on this 3211. And I think what I'm going to do is try to find a big, nice water pump and pay however much I got to pay for it, whether it costs, you know, $30,000 or $40,000, and replace both of these pumps with one, like a 4-inch stroke, like a National T100 or something like that. I never had a National pump. Or really what I'd like to find is a T59 Wheatley. It's 3.5-inch stroke. But anyway, spend a bunch of money on one big nice pump here, and then I'd have 2 of these 3-inch stroke pumps. One would need to go over there when we have trouble with that water pump again, and then we can sort of have a spare. But that's the whole deal with the pump. That's why that pump is such a piece of crap. You know, it's sit underwater and everything's rotted out on it and everything's worn out. So anyway, that's the reason that I spent $5,000 on parts in 5 days. You know, I've overhauled a bunch of water pumps in my life, especially when I was younger. I actually helped a guy and did it. You know, it's kind of what he did for a living. And I had more hell with this pump. I don't know why. It wasn't the pump's fault, but I just think it was cursed or something. I went to town to buy parts. I get home and couldn't find them. Everything got rained on. You know, my swivel come apart, broke that tap off. It was just really was a nightmare. Of course, being 108 degrees doesn't help either. That's why I spent so much money on this stupid pump that needs to go to the scrap yard, is because I'm just trying to get by with it, you know, until I can come up with something better. So I just left out there. I checked it again this morning. Everything looks great. You know, as I was putting this video together last night, you know, I don't really try to hide anything. I try to show the majority of reality of what it's like out here. And you know, you can walk, you know, you can see in the video, you know, you can see the greasy mess where the water pumps leaked oil, and you know, you look behind there, you can see where the you know, the salts killed a couple of acres of, you know, of vegetation. And I've talked about that a little bit before on a different location. You know, in the old days, back in the 20s when this stuff was drilled, and I don't know if I've said, this was the production location, is a production location for the 101-year-old oil well. It's an old well I've got that's still a good well. If you hadn't watched any of those videos, I work on the gearbox in one, and we do some maintenance to it in another. I'll put those links in the description. But you know, someone that just kind of walks into the channel that isn't around here, that doesn't know what's going on, can look at this and say, man, this looks like an environmental disaster. You know, they ruin all this land that the landowner owns. And I'd like to put that into perspective. And I want to start off by saying I'm not condoning what has went on out there in the last 100 years. We have regulations today for a reason. You know, I think things can be overregulated, but I also think regulations are necessary. But You know, the mineral owner out there is actually married to the landowner. And I was trying to figure, I bet that lease has made between 300,000 and 500,000 barrels of oil in the last 100 years. And it's a 7/8 lease, so 1/8 of all those sales go to the mineral owner. And you do that math at today's prices, that's like $3 to $5 million that the landowner has been paid, the mineral owner has been paid, plus land damages when you dig wells and whatnot. And in my opinion, as far as just a straight financial talk about the land price only, that is more than paid for the 4 or 5 acres of land that's been consumed out there. So I waited till I got back home because the road was so rough out there. I know the audio probably wasn't that great. So if you come at this from completely from an environmental standpoint, you know, someone that's an environmentalist that hates oil. By the way, you wouldn't believe all the comments I get, people, you know, threatening to kill me. You should be dead. You should die. I hope you die, you know, and kill an environment. It is kind of mind-blowing. But, you know, if you come at this from a complete environmental perspective, you know, someone that sees this and says that's a mess, that shouldn't be able to exist, I agree with that in a way, and I'd like to explain that. You know, this is a production facility that's been there over 100 years. You know, the problems that you see out there with the salt flats and all that are because of what went on 100 years ago. You know, that lease out there still makes about 10, it makes about 10 barrels a day. It's really a good lease for us. And that supplies, I've forgotten how much, is it 4 gallons a day or something the average person uses. That lease supplies quite a few people with their daily petroleum needs. And you know, I hate to get on electric car spill because I think all that's blown out of proportion on both sides of the argument. But when you know, if you want to ramp up electric car production, you're going to have to open, you know, new lithium mines. You're going to have to open new processing facilities. I'm getting tongue-tied. There's a lot of new things that you've got to have infrastructure. You know, you've got to have new power plants. You've got to make, if you want to run them off solar, you've got to build gazillions of solar panels. And someone says that electric car is better for the environment than a, you know, one that runs off petroleum. And I'm not going to argue that. Maybe it is. I don't know. But, you know, you take a place like this, even when you walk out there, it looks greasy and it looks nasty and it looks like something that should be in a third world country. It probably doesn't look nearly as bad as a lithium mine. But the truth is the environmental impact that place has caused has already been paid. You know, in the last 10 years, the last 20 years, there's been no additional, you know, fluids on the ground. There's been no additional, you know, salt flat added to. You know, there's been no additional wells drilled. There's been no additional anything. You know, we're getting to reap today the benefits of all the environmental catastrophes that they had, you know, 100 years ago. And when you go to something like, you know, if you're pro-electric car, that's fine, but the environmental impacts that car causes will be new. They're not like this lease. They're not, you know, environmental costs that have already been paid. I hope that makes sense. You know, you look at this place, you've got to keep it in perspective and understand that it's over 100 years old, that it was all this happened, you know, before the days of regulations. And you know, and like I say, back then the landowners didn't care. You know, they were getting rich off land that was worthless. You know, it wasn't uncommon, you know, to have a lease like that, pay royalties yearly that was worth as much as the entire piece of land. And you know, it's a little bit different today because the price of land's so high, but it wasn't the way back then. Hope that made sense. I had to rattle on a minute. You know, you just got to keep it the perspective of reality, how it is out there. Appreciate you watching. Like, share, subscribe, and all the good stuff, and leave me a comment. I'll catch you on whatever comes up next.